Welcome once again to the J Lowe Artist YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me on this artistic adventure. Today we'll be working with ink, pen and ink. So have your kneaded eraser, a number 2 or an HB pencil handy, and any type of ink that you would like to use. But make sure that it's archival, that it's permanent, that it's black, and a smooth ink. And let's start doing some ink drawing.
So as we're ink drawing, again, we're going to start out with our number 2 pencil. Everything we draw with the pencil gets erased, just like normal. So it's time for composition. Let's figure out how to compose this. Now, I've kind of cropped this image out, so it's pretty well composed. Her head is right almost smack dab in the middle of the page. And it takes up, about a third of the page, maybe a quarter of the page. So I'm just kind of going to go in there and just put a little oval and just say, that's the head. That's where I want the head to go. And again, we're thinking simple shapes here. Because we're kind of looking down on it, her neck, I mean, you can see her neck, but her shoulders are going to come right out of that neck area there. There's her arm. And her hand is just between her elbow and her head, almost smack dab in between. And don't have to worry about the shape of everything yet, but I'm just going to put in, there's one knuckle, and that's kind of a little oval. Then the other hand, and then the other fingers, we're just going to combine them together into a shape. You can almost use like stick figures to get things in there. Don't worry if the sword isn't straight. Half of the sword is just going to be used dots and dashes anyway. You could use a ruler too if you wanted to, but the pommel, the end of the sword, is just above her head. So if you go to her head and just go just slightly above it, do a little oval or an ellipse, and then the pommel is kind of a pylon shape. Biggest thing is you want that to line up with the sword. So you take your pencil and do something like this and just line up everything so it's all straight. If it's slightly off, you can adjust it. I was having a little discussion this morning with one of my students about the importance of have a working knowledge of armor when you're designing games, because he wanted to be a game designer. So if you're wanting to go into game design, have a good knowledge of armor. Especially today, there's a lot of that stuff in game design, whether it's futuristic armor or medieval armor. Really, if you're going to ever get into fantasy, then that's important too. Any kind of fantasy. This big old plate along her shoulder is called a pauldron. Pauldrons extend out over the breastplate. Spalders do not. Just a thought. And if you wanted to make her shoulders a little wider, that's okay. That's a little more heroic looking. But it's kind of up to you what you want to do there. So if you're going to get into game design or you do superheroes, that's just what you do. Your shoulders are a little broader. All this stuff that's down in here, we're just going to fade it as we go. And so we're not going to just abruptly end it. We'll fade it out as we go. Then it'll give you that idea that it continues on without having to draw it. So get in just simple shapes. Use your simple shapes as best you can. That pauldron might be a little bit big. Cut it down a little bit. And if you want to do the little fleur-de-lis on her breastplate, you could. So who is this girl? Yeah, Joan of Arc. Now, we haven't done her face yet. The face is probably the most important part of the whole thing. Remember, the eyes are almost in the middle of the head, and because she's looking up, it's going to be a little different. But I'm just going to take my pencil and kind of come down, kind of look at my scrap and just say, okay, her eyes are about right in there somewhere. And I'm just going to mark it. Because she's a 3/4 view, her nose is going to be like a little upside down 7. And I'm just going to mark that. And some things I know about faces, whenever you have a 3/4 view like this, and your nose has a little shadow under it right there, up at the very top, it's going to kind of come up and go into the eyebrow right there. So I'm just marking that in. Your nose is going to touch the corner of your eye as well, because as you kind of look over, because your nose sticks out a little bit further, it's going to touch that corner, almost cover up your tear duct, almost. And look at the shape of the eye. The eye is not an almond shape. Your left brain wants to put in symbols. Your right brain knows better than that. So don't let your left brain win here. I'm just going to throw in her mouth using a little shadow. The lip part that's further away from us, as the face turns, that's going to get shorter, so it's foreshortened. So don't try to draw the lips like you're looking straight at them. The left side, her right side, our left side, is going to be much shorter than the other side. I'm just going to put a little line there for the bottom lip. There's a little shadow that comes across the other side. You can mark that if you want. And if you want to mark where the iris and the pupil go, you're more than welcome to. Remember, the apex of the cheek is straight out from the nose, so if you go straight up from the nose, that's where the cheek is going to go. The hair's not too important here. I mean, hair I guess is important, but you want to just kind of simplify it as much as you can. What is our emphasis area? Where does our eye rest? Where does your eye go? What is important? Her face, right? So we spend a little extra time on her face. Face and hands. Everything else can kind of be fudged. That spalder can be, or that pauldron can be much larger or smaller. Nobody's going to care. But if the eye is down here on the cheek, then somebody's going to care. So try to get your proportions more correct with the eyes and nose and mouth. So spend a little extra time getting all that correct. We're going to zoom into her face and just point out a couple of things. And things that we've already learned about eyes. That dark ring around the iris. Look at the little shine is right across the pupil, but the shine is coming from below. And therefore, instead of being on the top of the pupil, it's kind of on the bottom of the pupil. You still have your eyelid, but because she's looking up, that's kind of pushing it up into that top eyelid. So your top eyelid is arched much more than your bottom eyelid. And it's hard to see detail here because our scrap is a little small, but we know what's going on. We're going to start with the eyes. And of course, we're going to start with that top eyelid. And that top eyelid is just a little arch. Just a little arch. And you can use little dots, you can use little dashes. Then the side of the eye, it's not pointy because we're looking around the eye and the eye is round. And so I'm just going to put a couple little dots right there on the side because there's a little shadow over there. And then her eyelid comes around. I'm going to put little dots there just to remind me where it goes. Plus, when you do the eyelashes, those little dots are going to help you. As far as the iris goes, you can do little brackets. You can do a little line there, so a little bracket over here. But I'm just going to do little dots. So I'm just going to do little dots here. And if my iris isn't quite round, that's okay. Because I can come back into it and I can kind of put little dots and kind of finish those up. She's got a little shine right there. So you may want to just leave that little space out. And her pupil is a little half moon. Leave a little dot, and voila, there it is. Piece of cake. Now, the eye is not white, so we're going to put in some little dots in there to figure that out. But for right now, we're just going to leave it that way. I'm going to move on to the other eye. Now, the other eye, this area towards the nose is very light. So I'm just going to leave that. Here's that little line above it. Little dots for the iris. Little half moon for the pupil. Little dots for the underneath part of the eye. And like I say, we can always come back in and add more if we need to. She's got an eyelid there too. You can use little dots for the eyelid, just little dots and dashes. If you want to put a little eyelid over there. And then her eyebrow are those little feathered lines like we used in our Jaguar. So I'm gonna just add a few little feathered lines, just a couple. And they're gonna get thinner as they get to the edge. A little dot and dash. And that's it. Here's the eyebrow. The other eyebrow is the same way, except the lines go the opposite way, just like we did with our Jaguar. Animals, people, they're all the same way. Little lines, little dots, little dashes. Now, the nose, you would think you would do a line down the nose. Instead of doing a line, you can kind of see where that nose is going to be. I'm just going to do these little hatched lines and just kind of end where the nose goes. Because that's the shadow that's around it. And then the tip of the nose could be little hatched lines, little dots, little dashes. The nostril is just a couple little dashes. You can do a little Nike swoosh kind of thing, like that. Upside down Nike swoosh. And then put little dots and dashes in there. Her nostril is not real visible, but you can see it's there. Just a couple little dots. And that's it. I'm going to do the same thing down her philtrum, that little divot under the nose, as I did around the nose. And you can put little dots and dashes just to finish it out. And we'll probably come back in later on and do some more. The corners of her mouth are usually darker than anybody's mouth. So if I come into the corner of this mouth and just come in and do a little dark edge there, just a little one. Maybe a little dot or a dash in the center, and then finish out the other side. You don't want to draw a line around the lips. If you feel like those lips are a little darker, you can put a dot or a dash in there, but that's about it. Everybody knows where the lips are. There's a little dot. Usually underneath the lip, it's a little darker, but our light's coming up or from below. Down the side of her face here is kind of the same. There's a little shadow, so I'm just going to hatch through it. Very light. Around the eye, there's a little shadow. Hatch through it. Very light. Or dots. You can even use dots. Even under this eye, there's a little bit of a shadow there. Maybe 2 or 3 lines and a dot, and that's about it. This edge of her face is defined by the darkness of her hair and that shadow that's in there. If you wanted to, you could take your pencil and very lightly define the edge of her face, and then just hatch through it using line as if it were hair. I'm going to just go like this. I'm just leaving out that little shape there for her face. And if it's not quite right, I can come back in and add more line until it's right. If I drew a line there, I couldn't do that. Or dots. Here's her neck. You could, if you wanted to, delineate this jawline with just a couple little hatched lines and maybe a dot in the middle. A couple little hatch lines out there. Here's her hair. That shadow that comes down her hair. Shadow across her forehead. And we're just about done with the face. Wasn't that easy? Here's some more hatch lines down the face. Where that core shadow is, you want to leave yourself just a little bit of an edge right there. And again, as we get back into this, as we do more, it's going to look better. Now, the easy part, her hair. Don't do continual lines through there. Just start out where the darkest areas are and just do those little feathered lines in the direction that you think the hair flows. Starting with the hair in the scalp as it comes out. Just back and forth. And remember, don't connect any lines. All you got to do is something like this. And then there's a little light edge in there. You just leave that light edge out. And if you think, well, it's not that light, take 1 or 2 little lines, go from the darkness, wherever the darkness is, like I got some here, and I'm just going to go up into that. Just a couple little lines. And that's hair. That's all you need. And if you've got some little hairs that kind of fly out and around, you can do that with the little feathered lines. Very light, soft. And then whatever you feel like you need to darken. There's some very light hair across her face here. I'm just going to leave that, kind of let it go. Any place that is dark, just throw a few little lines in. And it's almost like scribbling. I mean, basically, you are scribbling, just like we did with our jaguar. And if it's light, just leave it out. Couple little lines in the light areas. You got it. She's got a little shadow on that divot on her lip, so a couple little dots there. But when in doubt, you know, don't put it in. Put a dot or a dash. You can always come back in later. I'm getting rid of the graphite. And really, that's about it. We can, if we wanted to, go back in and add some more line, some dots and dashes, whatever we feel like we need. I'm going to add a few little dots in her white part of her eye, because the white part of the eye is never white. Just a couple little dots. And even in her iris itself, her iris is very light. I might want to put a few little dots and dashes in there. Whew, that's about it. Anything else that's in there, you could probably just leave it if you wanted to. And she does have some strong cheeks. Think, well, I want to put in a little bit. You put maybe 2 or 3 little lines down the cheek right there, and maybe just a couple little dots or dashes on the inside. But that's it. You don't have to do that. I'm just saying, if you wanted to, you could. Some little dots and dashes, maybe in the lip if you wanted to put a little bit in the lip. It's amazing what a little dot or a dash will do. Just a couple little dots in the lips, and voila, there you go. I'm going to do a little cross hatching in the nose, just a little bit, just to darken that little area. But if you drew a line, it would be too strong. As far as people go, that's really it. We got her hair, and then we got the fun part, the metal. The little braid that goes around her hair, you don't try to do a braid in there. Just do a little edge, just a little line. I have a hard time leaving things alone, so I'll probably come back into that head and put a few dots or dashes in there somewhere. But I'm going to work on the sword right now. As long as everything is straight and lined up, this is going to work out. I'm just going to start with that little shape of that. It's almost triangular, kind of down in there, and then just hatch through it because it's dark. And then there's a little lighter shape in there. And I'm going to hatch through that, but not as much hatching. Just a little bit. This little thing on the end here is called a pommel. You've heard the term being pummeled when you get hit really hard. That's because sometimes if somebody got too close to you, you were sword fighting, they'd hit you with that end. All we're drawing is darks and lights. Don't worry about anything else. When you're doing metal, you just kind of hatch through it to a little dark edge, to a light edge, and just leave it out, whatever it is. The handle is wire wrapped, and so rather than try to draw every little wire, I'm just going to go in and do the handle itself on both sides. You can use these little squiggly lines, but just look at the dark shape in there. Do that dark shape, and then leave out whatever's in there. In this case, it's wire, and so this outside's going to be really dark. You just hatch through that, scribble through it. This sword, called a hand and a half, because you can fit almost two hands on it. If you grasp the pommel, you could fit two hands on there. A little cross guard, or sometimes called keons. Just shapes of darkness. Don't try to draw a line around it. Just pick out the shapes of darkness and let it take care of itself. Whatever that is. There are times that I'm drawing and I have no idea what I'm drawing. And once I'm done with it, I look at it and go, oh, okay, I know what that is. But before, just shapes of darkness. If it just is hanging out there, you know, like this little tip, looks like it's just kind of hanging out there, not really attached on anything, that's fine. We can always come back into it later. I don't know if you want to do those little fleur-de-lis. There are four little fleur-de-lis in there too. I think I'm going to hold off and do them maybe later if I've got time. But from here on out, just draw the shapes of dark and light. When you get to the fingers, you've kind of put in this little part of the drawing in there. I guess if you wanted to, you could kind of come in and just do little lines coming up representing the hair. Leave the tip of the finger out. Don't draw lines around the fingers. They're going to look nice if you just leave them out. Here's her hair. Just draw the shapes in between the fingers. And everybody knows that's a thumb, but all I did was just draw that shape in there of the darkness and leave out that little area. And you got a thumb. Deal. Fingernails are another thing. I mean, she's got a fingernail. What if you just put 2 little dots right there, or 3 little dots, and said, okay, fingernail. That's all you need. Hands are another thing that people just fret over. Here's a little space in between the fingers. But I'm not trying to draw the fingers in themselves. Here's another little space here, a couple little dots, and that's it. Get rid of my graphite, and I didn't have to draw the hand in at all. If you want to, where your knuckles are, you can come in and just little hatched lines. Just come in and draw that little shape of the knuckle. I'm not really drawing the knuckles in. Just little shapes of dark where that hand is. If you wanted to, if you think, oh, well, I need to see the finger more, a couple little dots and dashes. That's really it. Don't too much in the fingers. I think people tend to want to draw too much. Here's that little pauldron. And those little fleur-de-lis, I'm not even draw those in. I'm just gonna leave little areas out. So I drew in these little, I don't know what they are, little shapes of something. But I'm gonna hatch through that. And from here on out, really, that's all you do. Try to pick out the shapes of darkness and hatch through them. Scribble them. You can even use little circles if you wanted to. If you want to denote an edge, try a dot or a dash. What if you go outside the lines like I did here? Is that okay? Sure it is. I have no idea what's going on in her arm. I think some of that is supposed to be some of that chainmail. So there's a texture down in there, but it's not that important if you don't put it in, because even from the photograph, you don't know what it is. Look at the shapes of darkness. You don't have to know what this is. I mean, there's a strap, there's a leather strap that goes around there. Just draw the shapes of darkness and you'll get it. There's a little roped edge around her breastplate. That's really going to be hard to put in. So if you just put in these little shapes, and then you can come back in and connect them if you want to. Something like that, and then just little shapes of darkness. And if you want to connect them, you can. These little round. Sometimes you're not even sure what it is that you're drawing. As long as you get the darks and lights, it'll come through. I know I've said that before. And sometimes you're just trying to get as much information as you can, as quickly as you can. Especially if you're drawing from life, if you're outside drawing some birds or something, you know that they're going to move on you eventually. Creative people challenge themselves. And whether it's through drawing or through sculpting or creating something, or just, people who work on hobby things like cars, and they like doing it. There's a satisfaction that they get with the creation. That's what art is all about. The whole idea that art makes life better because you do things that are challenging, that are different. It's the human spirit. You want to challenge yourself. Without a challenge, we stagnate. No one wants to stagnate. Really, it's just kind of a scribble fest. Once you kind of figure out what it is that you want to do, you want to just scribble through it as fast as you can. I'm going to get rid of all my graphite now. roped edges are really nice. I've tried to do roped edges in armor before. I can do some really nice rolled edges. Those roped edges are really hard to do. But that looks so good. We really don't have much more time. I'll get through this as much as we can. And you could work on this for a very long time. I mean, there's a lot of darkness here, a lot of things going on. Whatever your needs are, I hope that in some way I'm helping to fulfill those. And somewhere along your journey, I hope I'm making it a little nicer, a little easier. I'm not really any better than anybody else, but I'm different. That's what makes art maybe a little more interesting. You know, it's not really about how it's done, so you're doing it. And that you're enjoying the journey. Because isn't that what life's all about? It's a journey, finding new things. And hey, ink drawing might not be your thing. And that's okay. It's good that you tried it. Good place for a signature would be right here under her elbow. I'll put mine right there. And I hope you've enjoyed drawing with me today. Because you know what? Art makes life better. Thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting me. Thanks for drawing with me. But I hope you have a lovely day. And come back and join me again sometime on this wonderful journey we call art.